In this session, we're going to look at one sort of preliminary analytical tool that will help us understand video games. So this is actually borrowed from a book published in 2006, written by Alexander Galloway, a researcher from New York University. The title of the book is Gaming: Essays on Algorithmic Culture. It was at the time a very influential book on the study of video games. The author sort of starts from a preliminary question. What is really that makes video games different from other forms of creative expression, let's say books or movies, for instance? And the author argues that what really makes the difference from these other sort of cultural texts is that video games require actions. Video games require actions. Actions need to be performed for the game to exist, to be put into motions, to be enacted. And this is what Galloway argues makes video games different from other media. In his text, and I quote, he says, "Without the active participations of players and machines, video games exist only as static computer code. Video games come into being when the machine is powered up and the software is executed. They exist only when enacted." So what Alex Galloway is trying to tell us with this quote is that actions need to be performed, and actions are performed by two agents, by two actors. There is the player and there is the machine, or what he elsewhere calls the operator and machine. And actions need to be performed by both. If a player wants to play a game, but the machine, meaning the PC, console, the smartphone device, they don't work, they don't function, they don't operate, they don't execute the software properly, the game doesn't really work. Likewise, vice versa, we can say that if a console is working, if a PC has already kind of started a game, if it's sort of running on screen, but there is not an operator, a player performing certain actions, the game is not really a game. The video game doesn't really exist in its complexity, in its full functioning. So in this sense, video games are different from, let's say, a movie or a book. If you go to a cinema theater and the movie is being screened and the room is empty, the movie is still running, essentially. It is still functioning in the same way as it will do with a full room. Vice versa, with a book, even if there is no reader, all the text written on the book, all the text printed on paper, it's sort of static, it's there, it's always there, even if a reader is not opening the book, the text is essentially still the same. A video game is not like that. A video game changes following the actions of an operator and a machine. So Alex Galloway proposes that we start looking at game actions through a double axis. There are two pairs of levels, essentially, that we need to look at. So one is the operator and machine axis that we're going to discuss more at length in this section of the video. The other axis separates the diegetic and the non-diegetic level. And we're going to see in the following session what this means. So starting from the operator and machine. So who are really the operator and machine? Well, the operator is, it's you. It's the player, the human being who plays the video game. The operator action can take different forms. Obviously, the most common one is, let's say, pressing buttons on a controller of a, let's say, PlayStation or Xbox console. But if you're playing a game on a PC, it would be like clicking the mouse or pushing keys on the keyboard, for instance. If you're playing a smartphone, the operator actions are about pressing the touch screen of the smartphone. But if you're playing with a VR headset, the operator actions might involve, for instance, moving your head around. And if you're playing with a device that keeps track of your full body, let's say Microsoft Kinect that was released a few years ago, then the operator actions are no longer just moving your fingers, but they involve the whole body. Your whole body is required to be moving, to be performing actions in order to follow what the game wants you to do. So the actions that might be required from the side of the operator can be very different. You can also think about some arcade video games, even though they're no longer as popular as they were until a few decades ago. But some arcade video games require you, for instance, to ride a sort of fictional motorbike, or maybe ride a sort of representation of a racing car. And then again, your body is in a completely different position, a completely different setting, and the kind of movements that you have to do are again, completely different. So Galloway introduces also a further distinction here, looking at the operator's actions. He says that the acts of the operator can take two forms. They can be move acts or expressive acts. So move acts are essentially all those actions that the player performs in order to move around the environment. So let's say you're playing Assassin's Creed or Grand Theft Auto, one of these sort of open world 3D video games where you control a character, an avatar in the 3D world. If you, for instance, move the joysticks of your controller, if you move the mouse on your PC, you might be able to, let's say, move the camera around the game. Or you might also be able to move the character to make them walk or run in certain directions. So these are all move acts. Move acts are essentially about orienting your perception of the game within the environment of the game. They're about kind of gaining knowledge of the environment or moving around your character. Let's say you're playing a game such as SimCity, for instance, which is a completely different kind of perspective on the world. Usually you have like a top-down view of a simulated city. Well, you might still have move acts. For instance, when you move the camera, when you move your perspective on the world by moving the camera on the map. Expressive acts, instead, are a bit more different. They're about actions where the operator is expressing something in the game. Very often, video games are about representations of violence in different forms. So very often we have to shoot enemies or other targets in a video game. So pressing a button to shoot your weapon is an example of an expressive act. So let's say you're playing Fortnite, for instance, and you have to shoot at an enemy or an opponent. You might be able you might be asked to press a button to shoot your weapon and eliminate the target. Other expressive acts can also be, for instance, interacting with some of the objects around. Very often video games ask you to press a button to interact with a box that will give you some extra ammunition or some extra elements that you need as part of your game. So performing that action is an expressive act. If we return to the example of SimCity, an expressive act could be, for instance, building one section of your city block, for instance, building a new home or a new factory or building a new road. So these are all forms of expressive act. You are the operator that is expressing themselves within the environment of the video game. So what happens on the other side, the side of the machine? What kind of actions are performed by the machine in order to make the video game function? So the machine, as said, could be anything like a console, a PC, a smartphone, it could be like a VR headset and so on. So all these devices need to respond to what the operator is doing. At a very kind of elementary form, the machine needs to power up, it needs to run the software, it needs to make the software work and transform into images that are visible on screen. But it also needs to perform by responding to what the operator is doing. Its move act and expressive act need to be need to receive the adequate response from the side of the machine that essentially operates the software and shows what the software intends to see happening on the screen when the operator performs certain actions. But the machine is also working at a more kind of at another level, for instance, by moving the non-player characters. So whenever you play a video game, you're very often confronted with other characters that are not really controlled by a human operator, but are part of the video game, of the game environment. If, for instance, you're playing Assassin's Creed or, again, Grand Theft Auto, many of the other human characters that you see on screen, they are operated by the machine, they are controlled by the machine. And when you interact with them by talking with them or engaging in a fight with them, they respond following certain patterns. So the machine is controlling, taking control of all those actions. And some video games also have, for instance, non-interactive scenes where the operator is no longer required to perform any action. For instance, some narrative scenes might be entirely in control of the machine. So the machine is running those sequences, those images, and the operator, the player, is simply spectating as if it was like a short movie, essentially. So in order for a game to work, actions need to be performed by both the operator and machine. And now this brings to quite an interesting element, I think, in what makes video games quite unique and different from other media experiences, is that the operator and the machine are essentially responding to each other. And by doing so, they create what some authors have defined as a sort of new assemblage, a new entity that didn't exist before, an assemblage that is made of the actions of both the operator and machine.